For all our accomplishments, we owe our existence to 6 inches of topsoil and the fact that it rains. Hey folks, it is early May here and we are having an unusually dry spring. We've only had about 2 to 3 inches of rain in the past 30 days, which is very low for April. And so what's going on in my mind is drought risk management and drought planning. And so that's what I thought we'd talk about today. First, kind of an overview of what a drought is. Well, a drought is, when it doesn't rain. Pretty simple. When you get significantly less than average expected rainfall. And how it matters for a grazing operation. Well, if you're at a grazing operation, that grazing is your feed for your animals. That's how you're sustaining the adults. That's how they're producing milk. And that is how the kids are growing. And when it doesn't rain, revolutionary concept is that rain makes grass grow. It doesn't rain, the grass isn't going to grow or isn't going to grow nearly as well. And that's what we're kind of seeing right now. I'm only getting about 15 AUD per acre right now, which is pretty low for this time of year, for this pasture. It should be honestly close to double that. And kind of your risk analysis for drought comes from taking a look at your geography. Here in Nebraska, we have a pretty steep gradient from the east side of the state. We get about 30 inches average annual rainfall here and drops all the way to about 15 on the other end of the state. Pretty steep gradient across the state. That's a 50% drop. And as you go west across the state, your drought risk also increases. Not that we don't have any risk on this side of the state, on the eastern side, but there is significantly more risk if you're in the panhandle area. Because that 15 or whatever average annual rainfall, well, that average gets kind of artificially spiked by abnormal rain events that happen, every few years. And your actual typical annual rainfall is actually going to be lower than that. As you go west, your droughts are going to be more frequent. They're going to be longer and they're going to be more severe, because a drought doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't rain at all. It may just mean significantly less rain than what you're expecting. So you may still have some rain events, they're just not enough. Across the United States, it follows a pretty similar pattern from the East Coast to the West Coast. Further west you go, the higher your drought risk is. So how do you actually monitor for a drought? How do you know that a drought is coming? There's different ways of doing this. You can use something like the UNL Drought Monitor. That's a perfectly good application. Just keep in mind, it's not going to pick up on very localized droughts. And I do think what we're having right now is a very localized drought. It's not really showing up on that monitor. Just because, we've had storms go to the north of us, we've had storms go to the south of us, and several times in a row, we just keep getting nothing or very, very little, just a little sprinkle or something. And we've also had above average temperatures, so that also increases the ground temperature and causes faster evaporation and faster water loss, especially at a time of year where there's not all that much, there's not that much ground cover yet because it hasn't had a chance to grow yet because we haven't had enough rain to really get it going yet. Way that I actually monitor for drought here is, we keep a record of rainfall. We have rain gauge, keep a record of it. I have an app that kind of shows me the rainfall trends over time. It's built into the record keeping for the animals and for the pastures. And when I start to notice that drop down, what I start doing is taking pasture inventories. And pasture inventories, I look at what's ahead of us, and I look and I determine how much animal unit days per pasture that's not grazed yet, that's in front of us, do we have right now today. And we're actually just figuring out total animal unit days, not animal unit days per acre. So it's how many days of grazing per animal unit do we have in front of us. And then we basically convert that into time. How much grazing do we have left is what I look at. And when it starts to fall below about 2 to 3 weeks, which it is kind of getting in a little uncomfortably close to that range, that's when I start thinking about contingencies for my drought plan. What can we do early? And we'll get into that in a second. When I'm doing those pasture inventories, I'm taking measurements with a range stick. That's a whole topic I could get into. And I am making the assumption that we're not going to get any rain, of course. But I'm also making the assumption everything's just going to stop growing today, which is not a very good assumption. Even if we don't get any rain, stuff will still keep growing, just very slowly. But that helps us ensure that we're underestimating, if nothing else. So when it's starting to look like, okay, in 2 to 3 weeks, we're going to be effectively out of feed on the ground, that's when I start thinking about what am I going to do about this. Can't make it rain. We could try to look at irrigation or something like that. Stuff like that is just not very cost effective in this parts. And I actually have experimented with irrigating in the past, with just like lawn sprinklers and stuff like that. It's just totally uneconomical. One thing, you can increase your supply of feed by buying feed, so you could lease additional pasture or buy hay. Keep in mind, a drought is a regional event, though. If you're having a drought, so is your neighbor, so is their neighbor, typically. And the wider area of the drought, the more this effect has, but your hay prices are going to go up because they're not growing as much hay, they're not harvesting as much hay, they have their own animals to feed, they're not going to sell as much hay. The supply has gone down, and everyone else's demand has gone up, so the prices are going to go up, and they can skyrocket. Hay prices can absolutely skyrocket in a drought situation. So can pasture prices as well, for the exact same reasons. Even then, even if the prices don't skyrocket that much, if you're on a grazing operation, it's orders of magnitude more expensive to put these animals on hay, to the point where it's not really worth it to me to put them on hay. We will destock, and that's the second option. And we would, the first thing would be to wean early and sell kids early. The second thing we could look at, of course, is doing some harder culling and getting rid of less desirable brood stock. And then we can, if things get even more desperate for that, we keep going. We make even harder decisions then, even all the way up to and including, having to get rid of everything. That would be a pretty drastic measure. That would probably be, some kind of semi-apocalyptic drought scenario. But, it's in the cards, potentially. Also, for dealing with the drought situation here as it may develop, I do have some hay on hand. So, after doing early weaning and doing some destocking, I would probably opt into starting to use some of that hay to supplement them on pasture and make that pasture go a little bit further, before getting into more severe destocking decisions. I grew up in south central Nebraska, and growing up and still to this day, my folks experience significant drought events, multi-year drought events sometimes, that do cause them to have to make harsh destocking decisions. And it's just a fact of life. If you're running a grazing operation for profit, that drought is a possibility that you're going to have to deal with. Again, keep in mind, droughts tend to be a regional event. So if you're suffering from a drought and you're destocking because of a drought, so are your neighbors, so is people around you. So any kind of otherwise quality breeding stock that you're trying to get rid of that you think you can get a premium price for, there's not going to be nearly as many people interested. There's not going to be as many dollars chasing those animals, and there's going to be a lot more of those animals already on the market. So keep that in mind as far as your destocking plan goes, and that's why it's a good reason to have a good solid drought monitor in place, so you can plan ahead, so you can see it coming as far away as possible, so you can make early decisions that are in the best interest of your bottom line, so you're not having to make panic decisions later to try to keep up. So yeah, that's about all I wanted to talk about for today was, drought risk management, drought monitoring, and your options when you do get into a drought. I'm sure that there's other options and strategies that people have. Again, I have found that a lot of people, like east of like the Missouri or the Mississippi River, a lot of producers just don't ever talk about drought. Even if even grazing operations, they don't talk about drought. They don't think about drought. It's not something that happens often enough, and they're not severe enough to be a serious issue for them. But as you get west, that becomes more and more the case. If you got any thoughts or questions or anything, put it down in the comments.